You're going to love the new retirement home. They have knitting classes." Penelope's smile was as fake as her eyelash extensions. Charles nodded like an obedient puppy, while Leo mentally counted the money they'd make from selling my properties. I just smiled and said yes, that it sounded like a wonderful idea. But inside something shattered for good. They had chosen the most elegant restaurant in the city for this charade. The tablecloth was white linen. The crystal glasses reflected the golden evening light, and the aroma of fresh seafood filled the air. Everything was perfect for an emotional execution, all calculated to look like a celebration when it was really my funeral and I was still alive. "Mom, we know you've been a little confused lately," Charles continued, his voice thick with a concern he didn't feel. He was wearing a gray suit I had bought him for his college graduation. Now he was using it to bury me, confused. That word stabbed me like a dagger. I had faked a few memory lapses to test their patience, their love. I wanted to see if my children would take care of me when I truly needed them. The answer was right in front of me, wearing the very emerald green dress I had gifted her. "Dr. Miller says it would be for the best." Leo lied, avoiding my gaze. "A controlled environment, professional care, activities designed especially for people your age. People my age." As if turning 72 had made me a different species, something that no longer deserved respect or dignity. As if a lifetime of building a real estate empire from scratch meant nothing. "And the knitting classes are really therapeutic," Penelope added, touching my hands with fingers that burned with falsehood. "You can make tablecloths, scarves, useful things. While they were carving up my properties like vultures over a fresh kill, I would be making tablecloths in a room that smelled of disinfectant and despair." "When would the move be?" I asked, keeping my voice as calm as a lake before a storm. "Tomorrow," Charles answered far too quickly. "We've already made all the arrangements. You just need to sign a few papers, and in what will happen to my properties." The silence that followed was so thick I could taste it. They looked at each other like children caught stealing from the cookie jar. Penelope cleared her throat and Leo fiddled with his napkin until it nearly tore. "Don't you worry about that, Mom," Leo finally said. "We'll take care of everything. It's too much responsibility for you right now." Too much responsibility. The same properties I had bought, renovated, and managed for decades were suddenly too much for me. The same investments I had grown from an initial $5,000 to the $1.5 million I had now suddenly required younger minds. That night, I pretended to take the sleeping pills Penelope had given me. I spat them into a napkin when she wasn't looking. I needed to be wide awake for what was coming. At 1100, I heard their voices in my kitchen. They thought I was sound asleep. A fatal mistake. "The beach house is worth at least $300,000, Charles whispered, shuffling papers on my oak dining table. The table where I had signed my first real estate contract 40 years ago. And the downtown condo, another $200,000, not to mention the investments in the bank. We have to act fast." Penelope murmured, pouring champagne into glasses I had given them for their anniversary before she realizes what's happening. Leo laughed. That cruel laugh he had developed after marrying her. Realizes. "Are you kidding?" She asked me what time it was 3 times yesterday. A lie. I had feigned that confusion to test them to see how much of my own blood had turned to poison. The answer burned in my gut like acid. "Look at this," Penelope said, waving a paper I recognized as my will. "Once she's in the home, we can argue mental incompetence. The lawyer is already prepped. 400,000 for the main house," Charles calculated, scribbling numbers in a notebook. 300 for the beach house, 200 for the condo, and the investments add up to another 600,000, almost 1.5 million in total, 1.5 million. The fruit of a lifetime of work, sacrifice, and smart decisions. They had calculated it down to the last cent. While I was supposedly sedated in my own bed. And the best part, Leo added with a smile I could hear from my bedroom, is that she'll never know what all of this is really worth. She thinks it's just a few properties. They completely underestimated me. They thought I was a confused old woman who didn't understand numbers or business. They didn't know that every morning I reviewed my investments, that I knew the exact value of each property, that I had plans they couldn't even begin to imagine. At 5 in the morning, while they slept off their drunken betrayal, I got dressed in my best black pants suit. I took only the essentials, my passport, the jewelry I had hidden in a secret box, and the key to a safe deposit box in a bank in another city. In that box were the documents that would change everything. The taxi arrived on time. The driver helped me with my small suitcase and asked no questions. At the airport, I bought a one-way ticket to a coastal city where I owned a property they knew nothing about. During the flight, I closed my eyes and remembered my mother's words. Margaret, never fully trust anyone. Not even your own children. Blood can be corrupted, but dignity is eternal. She was right, and I was about to show them that a 72-year-old woman could be more dangerous than any enemy they had ever imagined. The plane landed in a city I hadn't visited in 30 years. Seabrook Shores, Florida, a name my children had never heard me speak, because some stories are too precious to share with those who don't deserve them. The salt air hit my face like a slap of memories. This was where it had all begun. This was where I had bought my first property with the life savings from my job as a secretary. $5,000 that seemed like a fortune back then. $5,000 that had grown into the empire my children wanted to steal from me. The taxi drove me through streets I recognized despite the passage of time. The palm trees were still there, taller now, their fronds whispering secrets to the wind. The old Florida-style homes maintained their quaint charm, though some had been renovated with that soulless, modern style. "Is this the right address, Mom?" the driver asked, stopping in front of a yellow house with green wooden shutters. "Looks like no one's lived here for a while." I smiled for the first time in days. "It's perfect." The house seemed to be sleeping, as if waiting for my return. It was small compared to the properties my children knew, but it had something none of the others possessed. A true history. It had been my secret refuge, my escape plan that I had kept quiet for decades. I took the keys from my purse. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from emotion. The door opened with a familiar creak, like a welcoming sigh. The inside smelled of old wood and sea salt. The furniture was covered with white sheets, creating ghostly figures in the dim light. I walked slowly, removing the covers one by one, revealing treasures I had left there like seeds, waiting for the right moment to sprout. In the kitchen, I found the first surprise. On the table was a note written in a shaky but familiar hand. "Mrs. Wetlock, I've been waiting for you all these years. Eliza." My heart skipped a beat. Eliza had been my housekeeper for 15 years until Charles and Leo decided we no longer needed her. "It's an unnecessary expense, Mom," they had said. "We can help you with the house." Another lie. They just wanted to control every aspect of my life, including who could or couldn't be near me. I heard footsteps on the front porch. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. The door opened slowly and there she was. Eliza, 30 years older, her hair completely white and her face etched with wrinkles that told stories of a life well lived, but with the same warm eyes I remembered. "I knew you'd come," she said simply, as if only days had passed instead of decades. "When I heard what your children were planning, I knew you'd find a way to get here." "How did you know about my children?" Eliza smiled sadly. "Penelope called me a month ago. She wanted information about your properties, about any bank accounts you might have hidden." I told her I didn't know anything. Of course, Penelope had been digging. It wasn't enough to steal what they knew about. They wanted to make sure there were no hidden treasures. The irony was delicious. They had called the one person who truly knew all my secrets, and she had protected me. "But I did know," Eliza continued, approaching me with slow but steady steps. "I knew about this house. I knew about the documents you kept here. I knew about your plans, and I've been taking care of everything, waiting for this day." My eyes filled with tears. I couldn't hold back. For the first time in months, someone was looking at me like a whole person, not as an obstacle or a source of money. "The documents are safe," Eliza whispered, taking my hands in hers. "I checked on them every month. I made sure they didn't deteriorate. Your plan is still intact." My plan? I had started designing it 30 years ago when I realized my children saw my properties as their guaranteed inheritance, not as the result of my hard work. I had created a protective web so complex that not even the best lawyer could easily unravel it. "Here are they?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Eliza led me to a back room I didn't remember. It had been converted into a small office with metal filing cabinets and a small safe embedded in the wall. "The combination is still the same," she said, pointing to the safe. "Your husband's birthday." My dear Richard, he had passed away 10 years ago, but his wisdom continued to protect my future. "Never put all your eggs in one basket, Margaret," he used to say. "And never let anyone else control your destiny, not even your children." I opened the safe with hands that no longer trembled. Inside were all the documents I had hidden for decades. Deeds to properties my children didn't know existed. Investments in international banks. A completely different will from the one they had photographed. But the most important thing was a thick folder marked with the initials HC, Hope Center. "Do you remember your dream?" Eliza asked, watching me as I reviewed the papers. "You wanted to create a place where older women could live with dignity, where they wouldn't be treated like burdens or nuisances." Of course, I remembered. It had been my secret obsession for years. A home for women my age who had been abandoned by their families, betrayed by their children, or simply forgotten by a society that discards anyone who no longer produces money. "Everything is ready," Eliza continued. "The permits, the blueprints, the funds set aside specifically for this project. It just needed you to come back to activate it." Tears streamed down my cheeks uncontrollably. For months, I had felt my life was falling apart, that I had lost all purpose. But here was the proof that I had always had a bigger plan, a mission that transcended my children's pettiness. "Is there anything else?" Eliza said, pulling a cell phone from her purse. Mr. Cromwell has been waiting for your call." Mr. Cromwell, my trusted lawyer, the only professional who knew the full extent of my plans. I had hired him in secret 5 years ago, paying him with funds from accounts my children would never discover. "Is he still reliable?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. More than ever, his own son tried to have him committed last year. He understands exactly what's happening. I took the phone with renewed determination. It was time to begin the next phase of my plan. The phase that would turn my apparent defeat into the sweetest victory of my life. I dialed the number I had memorized years ago. Mr. Cromwell answered on the second ring. "Margaret." His voice sounded relieved and excited. "I knew you'd call today. Are you ready to begin?" "More than ready, Mr. Cromwell. It's time to remind my children who I really am. Everything is set for tomorrow," Mr. Cromwell said over the phone, his voice filled with a satisfaction I could feel through the line. "Your children have called a family meeting for 10:00 in the morning at your house. They think they're going to sign the papers to transfer your assets." I smiled as I watched the ocean from the window of my secret refuge. The waves crashed against the rocks with a fury I understood perfectly. "Who will be there?" "Charles, Leo, Penelope, and they've also invited Tobias, your older brother. Apparently, they want family witnesses to make everything look legal and transparent." Mr. Cromwell chuckled ironically. "The lawyer they hired will also be there, a Mr. Evans, who has a reputation for being, let's say, ethically flexible. Tobias, my older brother, who had always envied my success in business. Ever since I inherited the family home 15 years ago, he had tried multiple times to convince me to sell it and split the money. Of course, he would be there like a vulture smelling a carcass. And our plan, perfect. I'll arrive at 10:30 when they're all gathered and feeling confident. I have all the original documents, the recordings we made last year, and the special surprise we prepared." The special surprise, a video I had recorded 2 years ago when I sensed this day might come. In it, I explained my reasons in detail, my true plans, and revealed secrets about my children that they thought were buried forever. "Eliza will be with me," I added, looking at my faithful friend who was making coffee in the kitchen with the ease of someone who had never left. "She has information that will be very enlightening." "Excellent. The more credible witnesses we have, the better. Are you sure you want to do this? Once we start, there's no turning back." I thought of Penelope's fake smile, Charles's lies, Leo's greed. I thought of the years I had sacrificed to build a future for children who only saw my death as a business opportunity. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. That night, Eliza and I stayed up late reminiscing about old times and planning the future. She told me what her life had been like after my children fired her. I got a job with a family in the city," she recounted as we drank chamomile tea. "But I never stopped thinking about you. Every month I'd come to check on this house to make sure everything was in order for when you returned." "How did you know I would come back?" "Because I know you, Mrs. Wetlock. You're not one to give up. And because 5 years ago, when you started suspecting your children, you asked me to keep this a secret. You told me, if I ever disappear, look for me here first." She was right. I had started to sense the betrayal years ago when I noticed strange glances between my children, conversations that stopped when I entered a room, questions that were too specific about my finances. "There's something else you should know," Eliza continued, her expression turning serious. 3 months ago, Penelope came to see me. She didn't just want information about your properties. She also asked about your mental health, about whether I had noticed any signs of dementia or confusion. My blood ran cold. "What did you tell her?" "I told her you were the sharpest woman I knew, that your mind was like a steel trap." She got very upset when I didn't give her the answer she was hoping for. Of course, they needed to build a case of mental incompetence to justify their theft. They had planned every detail of my destruction, from the sleeping pills to the repeated questions about the time. But there's more. Eliza stood up and brought a small box from the closet. "I found this in the trash at your house the day they fired me." She opened the box and my heart stopped. Inside were all the letters my husband Richard had written to me while we were dating. Love letters I had treasured for 50 years. Letters that had mysteriously disappeared from my room last month. They threw them away. Eliza whispered as if they were garbage. "Love letters from your husband treated like trash." I took them with trembling hands. The yellowed paper still held the faint scent of the cologne Richard used to wear. Every letter was a memory, every word a promise fulfilled, and my children had discarded them as if they had no value. Why would they do this? Because anything that represents true love bothers them, Eliza answered with a wisdom that comes from years of observing human nature. Your love for your husband, your generosity toward them, your work building a future, all of it reminds them of what they are incapable of feeling. That night, I couldn't sleep. I reread every one of Richard's letters, remembering the man who had loved me for who I was, not for what I owned. He had built the first business with me, celebrated every success, and comforted me in every failure. "Margaret," he had written in one of his last letters, "you are stronger than you think. If I'm ever gone, remember that your worth isn't in what you have, but in what you give. And if anyone ever tries to take that from you, you fight. Fight with all the fury of a woman who knows her worth." My worth. For months, I had allowed my children to make me feel useless, confused, incapable. I had played the part of the vulnerable old woman because a part of me wanted to believe they would protect me. But Richard was right. My worth didn't depend on their love or respect. It depended on me. At 8:00 in the morning, Mr. Cromwell called to confirm the final details. "Your children are very nervous," he reported with amusement. "Apparently, they've been calling the police all night, reporting you missing." Missing, of course. I'm supposed to be senile and confess. Ed, remember, a woman in my condition can't just disappear without help. They're building the case that someone kidnapped or manipulated me. The irony was perfect. While they were reporting my disappearance as a victim, I was orchestrating my return as an avenger. "Are you ready?" Mr. Cromwell asked. I looked at my love letters. I looked at Eliza laying out my best black dress. I looked out at the sea that had witnessed my first dreams. I had spent 72 years learning who I truly was. It was time to teach them the most important lesson of their lives. I'm ready to reclaim what's mine. The drive back felt like a triumphal procession. Eliza sat beside me, silent, but as steadfast as a guardian. Mr. Cromwell followed in his car, carrying the documents that would change everything. And I dressed like the CEO. I had always been prepared for the most important business meeting of my life. The meeting where I would teach my children the difference between a helpless old woman and a woman with 72 years of experience destroying those who underestimate her. The taxi stopped a block from my house. I could see several cars parked out front. Charles's gray BMW, Leo's white Mercedes, and an unfamiliar car I assumed belonged to the corrupt lawyer they had hired Tobias's red truck was also there, confirming that my brother had come to join the feast. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Eliza asked for the third time, though her eyes shone with a determination that said otherwise. "More sure than ever." Mr. Cromwell had arrived 10 minutes before us and was waiting in his car, reviewing the documents one last time. I walked up to his window, and he rolled it down with a smile that promised justice. "Everything's ready," he said, showing me a digital recorder. "I have the confessions we recorded last year when you suspected this might happen. I also have the certified copies of all the real documents, not the forgeries they think exist. Recording the confessions had been my idea, a kind of insurance against the betrayal I sensed was coming." In those recordings, Charles and Leo openly admitted they were waiting for me to die to inherit, that they considered my properties theirs by right, and that they saw me as an annoying obstacle to their plans. And the video loaded and ready. When the time comes, I'll press play, and their own words will destroy them. I walked toward my house, Nupayu, with steps that echoed like hammer blows on the pavement. It was strange to see my own home as enemy territory, but that was exactly what it had become. The invaders had taken my castle, believing the queen had fled forever. A fatal mistake. I rang the doorbell of my own house. The symbolism was perfect. They had taken over my life so completely that I had to ask permission to enter my own home. Penelope opened the door. Her face went through a fascinating sequence of emotions: surprise, fear, rapid calculation, and finally that fake smile I knew all too well. "Margaret, my God, we were so worried," she exclaimed with an Oscar-worthy performance. "Where have you been? We called the police, checked hospitals." "I was thinking," I replied simply, walking into my house as if seeing it for the first time and making some important decisions. Charles came running from the living room, followed by Leo and Tobias. Their faces showed a mixture of relief and panic that was delicious to watch. "Mom, you had us worried sick," Charles said, trying to hug me. I stepped back gently but firmly. "Worried about me or worried about your plans?" I asked in a calm voice. The silence that followed was thick. I could feel it pressing against my skin. Leo cleared his throat nervously while Penelope exchanged quick glances with Charles. "I don't know what you mean," Leo muttered, but his voice trembled in a way that gave him away completely. "I think you know exactly what I mean." Just then, Mr. Cromwell knocked on the door. The lawyer they had hired stood up from the dining room table where they had spread out all the papers for the fraudulent transfer of my properties. "Who is it?" asked Mr. Evans, a small man with a mustache who looked as nervous as my children. "My legal representative," I announced, my voice cutting the air like glass. "George Cromwell, specialist in elder fraud and asset protection." The color drained from my children's faces. Tobias took a step back, clearly regretting his involvement in this farce. Mr. Cromwell entered with Eliza at his side, carrying a briefcase that I knew contained the complete destruction of their plans. He introduced himself cordially to Mr. Evans, who immediately began to sweat profusely. "Mrs. Whitelock," Mr. Cromwell said formally, "I understand there are some documents that require your signature to transfer your properties to your children." "That's right," I confirmed, watching as Charles tried to regain his composure. "Perfect. But before we proceed, I need to verify a few legal details." Mr. Cromwell opened his briefcase and took out a thick folder. "For example, I need to confirm that you are mentally competent to make this decision." "Of course, she's competent," Penelope interjected far too quickly. "It's just that sometimes she gets a little confused because of her age." "Interesting." Mr. Cromwell smiled like a shark that has smelled blood. "Because I have here a very recent medical report from Dr. Sanchez confirming that Mrs. Whitelock is in excellent mental health and has full decision-making capacity." I pulled the report from my purse. I had obtained it 2 days before my disappearance, anticipating this exact situation. "I also have here," Mr. Cromwell continued, "some very interesting recordings that were made in this very house exactly 1 year ago." The color completely vanished from my children's faces. Charles gripped the back of a chair as if he were about to faint. "I don't know what you're talking about." Leo lied, but his voice was barely a whisper. Mr. Cromwell pressed play on his recorder. Charles's voice, he filled the room with crystal clarity. "Let's just hope she dies soon." I'm tired of pretending I care. As soon as she's in the ground, we sell everything and split the money. Leo's voice followed. All we need is to find a way to declare her incompetent. After that, it'll be easy to take control of everything. And finally, Penelope's voice. She's just a stubborn old woman. If she doesn't cooperate, we'll put her in the cheapest home we can find, and that's that. The silence that followed was sepulchre. Tobias looked at me with genuine horror, clearly realizing what kind of conspiracy he had stumbled into. Those recordings are taken out of context, Charles stammered. But there was no conviction left in his voice. Out of context. Mr. Cromwell laughed without humor. I have 3 hours of similar recordings, all made with your mother's knowledge and consent, as she has suspected your intentions for years. Eliza walked to the table and gathered all the fake documents they had prepared. She reviewed them one by one with the authority of someone who knew every detail of my real papers. These documents are fraudulent, she announced. The signatures are forged, and several of the assets mentioned here don't even exist in the official records. That's impossible, protested Mr. Evans. But he was already packing his things, clearly wanting to flee the situation. It's very possible when someone has been planning to rob their own mother for years, I said finally, my voice filled with an authority that had been dormant for too long. And it's especially possible when that mother is much smarter than you ever imagined. Mr. Cromwell then took out the envelope containing the video I had recorded 2 years ago. The video where I revealed not only my true plans, but also some secrets about my children that would destroy them completely. Now, I said, sitting at my own table like the CEO I had always been, it's time to talk about the consequences of betraying the woman who gave you life. Their faces were perfect portraits of absolute terror, and I was just getting started. Sit down, all of you, I ordered in a voice that allowed no argument. It's time for you to hear some truths you've been avoiding for years. Charles, Leo, and Penelope settled into their chairs like students being punished. Tobias remained standing, clearly uncomfortable with his involvement. Mr. Evans had tried to slip away, but Mr. Cromwell had discreetly blocked his exit. First, I began pacing in front of them like a prosecutor before a jury. Let's talk about real numbers. You believe my estate is worth approximately $1.5 million. I saw them exchange nervous glances. They had done their calculations in secret, believing I had no idea of the true value of my properties. You're off by more than $30 million. The silence was absolute. Even Eliza looked at me with surprise, though she knew I had secrets within secrets. My real net worth, I continued, savoring every second of their shock, including the properties you don't know about, the international investments, and the businesses I've been managing discreetly for decades, exceeds $5 million. Penelope turned as white as a sheet. Charles gripped the arms of his chair as if the world were shaking beneath him. $5 million, Leo whispered, his voice breaking. $5.2 million to be exact. Money you thought you could steal while I was playing with knitting needles in some deplorable institution. Mr. Cromwell opened his laptop and projected a presentation onto the wall. It was a detailed summary of all my properties, investments, and bank accounts. Numbers appeared one after another, each figure hitting my children like a financial slap in the face. Main house appraised at $600,000, beach house at $450,000, downtown condo at $300,000. But that's just the beginning. The following slides revealed properties they had never imagined. 2 condos in Miami, a small hotel in Key West, investments in growth funds, shares in 3 tech companies, and accounts in banks in Switzerland and Panama. How? Charles couldn't finish the question. How did a senile and confused woman manage to accumulate such a fortune without you noticing? I smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had been planning this moment for years. Very simple. You completely underestimated your mother. Eliza came forward and placed an additional folder on the table. There are also the businesses Mrs. Wetlock has been running discreetly, a real estate consultancy, 2 investment firms, and the project that matters most to her. What project? Penelope asked, her voice strangled. This was my favorite part, the moment I revealed the dream I had been secretly building for a decade. The Hope Center, I announced, watching their confused faces. A residential and serve ICE complex for older women who have been abandoned by their families. Women whose children see them as burdens instead of human beings. Mr. Cromwell changed the slide and a spectacular architectural rendering appeared. A beautiful complex with gardens, a library, art workshops, medical clinics, and dignified apartments for 200 residents. The land is already purchased, I continued. The permits are approved. Construction begins next month. And you, my dear children, have just become the primary inspiration for this project. I don't understand, Leo murmured. Every time you treated me like a useless old woman, every time you talked about me as if I were a piece of old furniture, every time you planned my future without consulting me, I added another service to the Hope Center. Thanks to you, it will be the best center of its kind in the entire country. Tobias finally spoke. Margaret, I didn't know about any of this. I thought this was just a normal family meeting. I know, Tobias. That's why you're not in legal trouble. But I pointed to my 3 black-hearted children. They are going to face the full consequences of their actions. Mr. Cromwell took the floor. Attempting to defraud a senior citizen is a federal crime. Forging documents is another federal crime. Conspiring to have someone declared incompetent without medical grounds is yet another. We're talking about multiple charges that could result in several years in prison. You can't do this to us, Charles exploded, standing up abruptly. We're your family. We're your children. Exactly, I replied, my voice icy. You are my children, and that makes your betrayal infinitely more painful and more unforgivable. I walked up to Charles until I was standing right in front of him, forcing him to look me in the eyes. I gave you a college education that cost $80,000. I helped you with the down payment on your first house, $50,000. I lent you money for your business that you never paid back, $30,000. I gave you my unconditional love for 45 years, and this is how you repay me. I turned to Leo. I paid the medical bills when your son had leukemia, $100,000. I helped you through your divorce, $40,000 in legal fees. I let you live in my house for 2 years when you lost your job. I gave you my emotional support when no one else believed in you, and this is how you repay me. Finally, I faced Penelope. I welcomed you as a daughter when you married Leo. I defended you when the rest of the family criticized you. I included you in my will when you weren't even my blood. I treated you with more love and respect than your own parents gave you. And this is how you repay me. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation from a woman finally allowing herself to feel all the rage she had been holding back. For months, I let you make me feel useless. I faked confusion when you wanted me to be confused. I acted like the vulnerable old woman you needed me to be to justify your plans, but it was all an act. It was all a test. A test you failed spectacularly, Mr. Cromwell added. Eliza placed the final document on the table. My real will, the one that truly mattered. This is my true will, I announced. It was drafted 3 years ago and updated 6 months ago when your plans became more obvious. Charles tried to get closer to read it, but Mr. Cromwell blocked him. In this will, I continued, Charles inherits $5,000. Leo inherits $5,000. Penelope inherits nothing because legally she is not my family, and she has proven that emotionally she isn't either. $5,000. Leo pouted. That's impossible. We're your only children. The rest of my estate, I went on relentlessly. $4,990,000 will be divided between the Hope Center, 3 charities that protect senior citizens, and Eliza, who has shown more loyalty in 30 years of friendship than you have in a lifetime of being my children. Penelope started to cry, but her tears no longer moved me. Charles slammed his fist on the table in frustration. Leo sank into his chair as if he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. But there is a way, I said finally, watching them cling to this last shred of hope. What way? Charles asked desperately. We work to deserve it. The Hope Center needs administrators. It needs committed staff. It needs people who understand the value of human dignity. If you can prove over the next 5 years that you truly care about something more than money, if you can prove that you understand the damage you caused me and are willing to repair it, then we can talk about an inheritance. 5 years, Leo muttered. 5 years working without pay at the Hope Center. 5 years proving you can value older people as human beings, not as obstacles. 5 years proving you deserve to be called my children. The silence stretched for several minutes. I could see their minds working, calculating, evaluating options that no longer existed. "And if we refuse?" Penelope asked defiantly. Mr. Cromwell smiled. "Then you face the criminal charges for fraud and attempted defraudation, and you lose any possibility of an inheritance forever." It was a perfect ultimatum. Justice with the possibility of redemption, punishment with the opportunity for growth, exactly what a mother should give, consequences with love, boundaries with hope. "The choice is yours," I concluded. "You can leave right now and never see me again, or you can stay and begin the long road to regaining my respect and your own dignity. Your next words will determine whether I still have children or just strangers who share my blood." The silence stretched like an invisible web between us. I could see the gears turning in their minds, calculating losses and gains, pride versus economic survival. It was fascinating to watch my own children reduce our decades-long relationship to a simple mathematical equation. Charles was the first to speak, his voice with contained emotion. "Mom, we never really wanted to hurt you. We just thought that it was better for me to be locked away knitting while you spent my money," I interrupted. "That a 72-year-old woman had no right to decide her own life." "It wasn't like that," Leo protested weakly. "We just wanted to make sure you were safe, taken care of." "Liar?" The words shot out of my mouth like a bullet. "You wanted to make sure your bank accounts were full. The only security you were concerned with was financial." Penelope wiped her tears with the back of her hand, smudging her expensive makeup. "So, what are we supposed to do now? How are we supposed to survive without money?" I finished for her. "The exact same way millions of people survive every day. By working. By earning a living through your own effort instead of waiting for someone else to die to finance your lives." Mr. Cromwell had been watching silently, taking mental notes of every reaction. Now he spoke in a professional tone. "You have 24 hours to make a decision. If you choose the rehabilitation program at the Hope Center, you will start tomorrow morning. If you choose to leave, I have orders to proceed immediately with the criminal charges." "Tomorrow morning," Charles paused, "but we have jobs, responsibilities." You had jobs," I corrected. "Now you have a chance at redemption that, frankly, you don't deserve." I walked to the window, looking out at the garden I had tended for decades. The roses I had planted were still blooming, oblivious to the human drama unfolding behind them. Nature had that wisdom. It grew, it flourished, it created beauty regardless of betrayals or disappointments. "Do you know what the most painful part of all this has been?" I asked without turning around. "It wasn't discovering you planned to rob me. It wasn't hearing you count my money like vultures. The most painful part was realizing that you never really knew me." I turned back to them, watching their confused faces. "For 72 years, I have been a woman who fights, who builds, who dreams. I started with $5,000 and turned it into over $5 million. I built a real estate empire with no one's help. I navigated a business world dominated by men and came out victorious. I raised 2 children while managing properties and making investments." My voice rose, filled with decades of accomplishments they had systematically ignored. "And you reduced me to a confused old woman who needed knitting classes. You saw me as an obstacle instead of the woman who built everything you wanted to inherit." Eliza came over and placed a hand on my shoulder. Her presence calmed me, reminding me that not all relationships are based on convenience. "Is there anything else you should know?" I continued, returning to my chair. "The Hope Center isn't just a charity project, it's my real legacy. It's proof that an older woman can change the world instead of just waiting for death in a room that smells like disinfectant." Mr. Cromwell changed the presentation on his laptop, showing the detailed plans for the center. It was beautiful. Modern buildings surrounded by gardens, spaces for art and music, a specialized library, medical clinics, and apartments that truly looked like homes. 200 women will live here, I explained. Women who were abandoned by greedy families. Women who lost everything in late-life divorces. Women who simply need a place to grow old with dignity. "It's impressive," admitted Tobias, who had remained quiet during the confrontation. "When do you plan to open?" "Construction begins in 6 weeks. The first phase will be ready in 18 months. And if my children decide to participate in their redemption, they will help build it." "What kind of work would we have to do?" Leo asked cautiously. All kinds of work, Eliza answered before I could. Cleaning, gardening, administration, resident care, real work, honest work, work that will teach you the value of serving instead of being served. But we don't know how to do that kind of work, Penelope protested. You'll learn, I said simply. The same way I learned to do business when I was your age. The same way I learned to invest in the stock market when I was 50. The same way I learned to use computers when I was 60. The difference is I did it for ambition and growth. You will do it for survival and redemption. Charles stood up and began pacing the room, his hands trembling slightly. This is surreal. 2 days ago we thought, and now, 2 days ago, you thought you were the beneficiaries of a multi-million-dollar inheritance, I finished. Now, you know you are the protagonists of a lesson about the consequences of family betrayal. And if we do it, Leo asked, if we work at your center for 5 years, will you really change the will? The question I had been waiting for, the question that would determine if this was justice or vengeance. If for 5 years you demonstrate that I can value people for who they are instead of what they own. If you learn to give instead of just take, if you show the kind of character I had hoped I raised in you, then yes, I will modify the will. How much? Asked Penelope, always direct when it came to money. Enough for you to live comfortably, but not enough for you to turn back into the greedy people you are now. Let's say 500,000 each. The 500,000. A fortune for most people, but only a fraction of what they had planned to steal. It was enough to reward real growth, but not so much as to eliminate the need to keep working and growing. And the rest? Charles asked. The rest will remain with the Hope Center forever to ensure that women like me are never again treated as burdens or inconveniences by their own families. Mr. Cromwell closed his laptop with a definitive click. As I said before, you have 24 hours to decide. Tomorrow at 10:00 in the morning, you either arrive at the Hope Center construction site ready to work, or I file the criminal charges with the district attorney's office. He stood to leave, but before he walked out, he added, and don't bother looking for other lawyers. I have copies of all the evidence in multiple locations. This is not a negotiation, it's an ultimatum. After Mr. Cromwell left, we sat in silence. The weight of the decision filled the room like toxic smoke. Would you really have us arrested? Charles asked in a small voice. Were you really planning to put me in a nursing home while you sold my properties? I countered. Touch. Eliza came to my side. Mrs. Wetlock. Are you sure you want to give them this chance after everything they did? I'm sure, I answered, though my heart was still bleeding. Because at the end of the day, they are still my children, and a mother never stops hoping her children will become the people she always believed they could be. It was my final gamble, my last hope that blood could be stronger than greed. Tomorrow, I would know if I had raised children or strangers. The next morning found me awake before dawn, making coffee in the kitchen, where my children had celebrated my supposed dementia with cheap champagne. Eliza had spent the night in the guest room, and together we watched the sky change from black to gray, waiting to see what decision my children had made. Do you think they'll come? Eliza asked, pouring coffee into the porcelain sea, cups I had inherited from my mother. Honestly, I don't know. Part of me hopes they do. Part of me hopes they don't, and I'm not sure which hope is stronger. At 800 my phone rang. It was Mr. Cromwell. Good morning, Margaret. Ready for the first day of school. As ready as one can be to find out if I still have children or just strangers who share my DNA. I've been at the site since 7 getting things ready. The foremen have been briefed on the special situation with the new volunteers. Volunteers. An elegant way to describe people working to avoid prison. Any sign of them? Not yet, but there are still 2 hours to go. Eliza and I arrived at the Hope Center construction site at 9:30. It was my first time seeing the land since the prep work had begun, and a wave of emotion washed over me. There it was, my dream taking physical form. Tractors moved earth, where therapeutic gardens would soon grow. Workers marked the foundations where the buildings would rise, housing women who had been discarded by their own families. It's beautiful, Eliza murmured, taking my arm as we walked the grounds. It's hope, I corrected. It's proof that it's never too late to start something new, to change the world, to show that older women are not refusing to be thrown away. Mr. Cromwell approached with a clipboard and a yellow hard hat. Everything's ready. If they show up, they'll start with basic tasks, clearing the area, organizing materials, helping the workers with manual labor. And if they don't, I have an 1100 appointment with the DA, 9:55, 9:57, 9:59. At exactly 10:00, a taxi pulled up to the site entrance. My heart beat so fast I thought it would leap out of my chest. Charles got out first, wearing old jeans and a T-shirt I hadn't seen in years. Leo followed in work's clothes he had clearly bought the night before. Finally, Penelope emerged from the taxi in athletic wear, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. They looked vulnerable, scared, human. They walked toward us with slow steps, like condemned prisoners heading to the gallows. When they were close enough, I could see that none of them had slept well. Their eyes were red, their faces gaunt from a night of impossible decisions. "We're here," Charles said simply. "I see that," I replied, keeping my voice neutral, though my heart was performing emotional acrobatics. "We've decided." Leo cleared his throat. "We've decided. Do we want to try? We want to try to fix things." "Are you sure?" "Because once you start, there's no going back. 5 full years or you go straight to jail." Penelope nodded slowly. "We're sure. Or at least we're sure we don't want to go to prison." It wasn't the noblest motivation, but it was a start. Mr. Cromwell came forward with 3 extra hard hats. "Welcome to the Hope Center. I'm your supervisor, and for the next 5 years, I am the most important person in your lives after your mother." He handed them the hard hats and a sheet with the basic rules. Work hours are 800 a.m. to 500 p.m., 1 hour for lunch, 0 tolerance for complaints or negative attitudes. Weekly progress evaluations. Your first direct supervisor will be Mike. Mr. Cromwell pointed to a burly man with calloused hands and a kind smile. He has 30 years of construction experience and 0 patience for princesses or princes who've never worked with their hands. Mike came over and sized them up with the expert gaze of someone who can spot a slacker from 100 yards away. "Any of you ever done physical labor before?" he asked. Total silence. "Perfect," Mike grinned. "We'll start with something simple. See that pile of rubble?" He pointed to a mountain of broken concrete and rusted metal. "It needs to be moved from here to over there." He pointed to a spot about 200 feet away. "By hand?" Penelope asked in horror. "By hand," Mike confirmed. "Stone by stone, piece by piece. It's honest work for people who need to remember the value of effort." I watched them as they approached the pile of rubble, as if it were an impossible mountain to climb. Charles lifted the first piece of concrete and immediately winced in pain. Leo tried to carry too much at once and nearly fell backward. Penelope looked at her perfectly manicured hands and sighed with the resignation of someone accepting an inevitable fate. For the next 4 hours, I watched them work. It wasn't pretty. Charles complained constantly about his back pain. Leo stopped every 10 minutes to catch his breath. Penelope broke 2 nails in the first hour and cried silently for another 10 minutes, but they worked. At lunchtime, they sat on the ground like the rest of the workers, eating basic sandwiches and drinking lukewarm water from a shared thermos. Their clothes were dirty, their hands stained, their faces red from the sun and exertion. "How are you feeling?" asked, approaching them during their break. "Like we got hit by a truck," Charles mumbled, massaging his shoulders. "This is harder than we thought," Leo admitted. "And what did you think?" "That honest work was easy. That the people who build the world with their hands do it because it's fun." Penelope looked at me with eyes that for the first time showed something resembling understanding. "I never thought about it. I never thought about how hard it must be to earn a living like this. Now you know. And this is just the first day of the next one, 825. The afternoon was even harder. Their bodies weren't used to the physical labor, and every movement became more difficult. But something interesting started to happen around 300. They began to help each other. Charles carried some heavy stones that Penelope couldn't move. Leo brought water to Charles when he saw he was getting dehydrated. Penelope found extra gloves for Leo when she noticed his hands were getting raw. Small acts of consideration they hadn't shown each other in years. At 500 sharp, Mike blew a whistle. "First day is done. Tomorrow we start at 8 sharp. Be late and we start over from scratch." My children walked toward the ta. Sigh they had called moving like arthritic old people. Before getting in, Charles turned to me. "Mom, thank you for giving us this chance. I know we don't deserve it." "You don't deserve it yet," I corrected. "But maybe in 824 more days, you will." That night, Eliza and I had dinner in silence, processing the day's emotions. It had been strange to see my children reduced to exhausted manual laborers. But it had also been hopeful. "Do you think they'll make it?" Eliza asked as we washed the dishes. "I don't know. But for the first time in months, I'm curious to see what kind of people they'll become if they actually complete these 5 years." I looked out the window at the stars beginning to appear in the dark sky. The hardest part of this whole process had begun. Waiting to see if justice could turn into redemption, if punishment could transform into growth. 5 years to find out if I still had children, or if I had finally found the strength to create something more valuable. A family built on mutual respect instead of convenience. Time would tell. 4.5 years had passed since that first day of rubble and tears. The Hope Center was no longer just a dream on architectural blueprints. IT was a vibrant reality with 200 women living full and dignified lives within its walls. I walked through the gardens my children had helped plant, watching residents participate in painting classes, book clubs, and adapted yoga sessions. The scent of roses and jasmine filled the air, mingling with the sound of laughter coming from the creative workshop area. Mrs. Wetlock greeted Alice, an 80-year-old woman who had come to the center after her family declared her too expensive to maintain. Now she ran our oral history program, helping other residents document their lives for future generations. "Good morning, Alice. How is the memoir project going?" "Incredible. We have 50 complete stories already. Women who were nurses during wars. Teachers who educated entire generations. Mothers who raised 10 children while working in factories. Stories that were about to be lost forever." This was exactly what I had envisioned, a place where older women were not seen as burdens, but as living libraries of wisdom and experience. "Have you seen Charles this morning?" I asked. "He's in the kitchen helping with the special breakfast for Carmen. She's turning 90 today." Charles in the kitchen. If someone had told me 5 years ago that my son would be preparing breakfast to celebrate the birthdays of elderly women, I would have laughed until I cried. Now it was just part of who he had become. I found him decorating a cake with the concentration of an artist. His hands, now calloused from years of manual labor, handled the piping bag with surprising delicacy. 90 pink roses or 90 blue roses?" he asked without looking up, clearly knowing it was me who had entered. "Definitely pink," Carmen says. "Blue reminds her too much of hospitals. Pink it is." Then he continued decorating, adding small frosting flowers with a patience he had never shown in his previous life. "You know, Carmen told me yesterday she was one of the first female accountants in her city. She managed the finances for 3 large companies back when women could barely open a bank account without their husband's permission. And what do you think of that?" Charles finally looked at me, his eyes showing a depth that hadn't been there 5 years ago. "I think I was an idiot for believing that age determined a person's value. Carmen knows more about finance than I ever did after 40 years in business." It was an acknowledgement not just of his mistake with me, but of his fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to grow old. "Where are Leo and Penelope?" Leo is in physical therapy with Mercedes, helping her with her rehabilitation exercises. Penelope is in the beauty salon. The beauty salon had been Penelope's idea during her 2nd year. She had noticed how many residents became depressed after losing access to basic grooming. So, she had proposed creating a space where they could maintain their personal dignity. Now, she managed a small salon where the women got their hair done, received adapted manicures, and felt beautiful regardless of age. I walked to the salon and found Penelope gently massaging the arthritic hands of a woman I recognized as Miriam, a former professor who had come to the center after her daughter abandoned her in a public hospital. "Does that hurt?" Penelope asked with genuine concern. "Not at all, dear. Your hands are magic. My fingers haven't felt this good in years." Penelope had changed physically over the years. She no longer wore excessive makeup or designer clothes. Her beauty was more natural now, more authentic. But the most noticeable change was in her eyes. Where there was once greed, there was now compassion. Mrs. Wetlock greeted me when she saw me. Are you here to see the new hand treatment I developed for arthritis? I came to see you, I answered honestly. She blushed slightly. Over the years, she had learned to value recognition for her work, not for her ability to manipulate situations. Can I talk to you for a moment? She finished Miriam's treatment, and we went out to the garden. We sat on a bench overlooking the entire complex. It was my favorite place to reflect, where I could see the fruit of decades of dreams turned into reality. How do you feel? I asked. Tired, she admitted. But it's a different kind of tired. Before, I was tired of pretending to be someone I wasn't. Now I'm tired from working hard, but I sleep better than ever. Do you regret anything? Penelope was silent for several minutes, watching a group of residents practicing Tai Chi on the lawn. I regret being so blind, she finally answered. I regret seeing only the money instead of the extraordinary woman who had earned it. I regret trying to steal instead of trying to learn. They were words I had waited years to hear, but now that I heard them, I realized I no longer needed them. Her transformation had made them unnecessary, and what have you learned? That respect isn't inherited, it's earned, Ed. That age brings wisdom, not incompetence, that caring for others is more satisfying than being cared for by others. She paused. And that you weren't just my rich mother-in-law. You were an example of what a woman can achieve if she doesn't accept limitations. Those last words hit me like a ray of sunshine after years of storm. Leo came running from the rehabilitation area, clearly excited. Mom, Mercedes walked 10 steps without help, 10 whole steps. My youngest son, who once couldn't show genuine emotion for anything that wasn't money, was beaming over the physical progress of an 85-year-old woman who wasn't even his relative. She says she wants to walk to her rose garden next week, Leo continued, breathless from running and excitement. Can you imagine? 6 months ago, she could barely sit up without help. And what are you going to do to help her achieve that? I already spoke with the physical therapist. We're going to create a special strengthening program. I'll be with her for every session. He stopped, realizing what he had said. If that's okay with you, of course. It was the first time in years he had asked my permission for something that clearly mattered to him for the right reasons. That sounds perfect, Leo. That afternoon, Mr. Cromwell came to visit for our monthly review meeting. We sat in my office at the center, surrounded by photographs of residents, certificates of recognition, and letters from grateful families. How do you evaluate them? He asked, reviewing his notes from the past few months. They've changed in ways I didn't think possible, I admitted, not just in their work here, but in who they are as people. Do you think it's genuine, or are they acting to impress you? It was the question I had asked myself for months. At first, they were definitely acting, but there's something about the work here about caring for others that reveals a person's true character. You can't fake compassion for 4 and 1.2 years. So, I think my children have found versions of themselves they didn't know existed. Versions that I like much more than the people they were before. Mr. Cromwell smiled. And the will? The will can wait another 6 months. I want to see how they handle the final decision. What final decision? In 6 months, their mandatory period ends. They will be free to leave and live their lives as they wish. The real question is, will they stay because I want to be here, or will they leave because they've served their sentence? It was the ultimate test. Anyone can change temporarily when they have no options. True character is revealed when the options return. And if they leave, then I'll know I did the right thing by changing my will. And if they stay, then I'll know I've finally gotten my children back. That night, I had dinner with Eliza in the center's communal dining room, surrounded by the sound of cheerful conversations and laughter from women who had found a new family in their golden years. Are you nervous about the next 6 months? Eliza asked. Curious. I corrected. After 76 years of life, I've learned that the best surprises come when you finally stop trying to control the outcome. 6 months later, the day I had been waiting for 5 years finally arrived. It was a perfect spring morning, the sun filtering through the blinds of my office as I reviewed the documents Mr. Cromwell had prepared for this special occasion. The modification will lie on my desk, sealed in an envelope that contains the final decision about my children's future. But first, I had to know what decision they had made. At 10:00 in the morning, Charles, Leo, and Penelope arrived at my office dressed in their usual work clothes. Over 5 years, I had learned to read their emotional states by the way they walked, and today, they looked serene and determined. "Good morning," I said, motioning for them to sit. "Do you know why you're here?" "Today marks exactly 5 years since we started working here," Charles answered. "And according to our agreement, today we are free to go." "Exactly. Your legal obligation has ended. You no longer face criminal charges. You are no longer required to be here. You are completely free." The silence stretched for several minutes. I could see they had prepared for this moment, that they had discussed among themselves what they would say. "We've made a decision." Penelope finally spoke, her voice firm but filled with emotion. "I'm listening." Leo cleared his throat. "We want to stay, not because we have to, but because we want to." My heart stopped for a moment, but I kept my expression neutral. "Why?" "Because this place has become our home," Charles answered. "Because these women have become our extended family. Because the work we do here is the most important work we've ever done in our lives. And because Penelope dotted, tears beginning to form in her eyes, we finally understand what you tried to teach us from the beginning, that life isn't about what you can take, but what you can give." I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the gardens. I could see Mercedes walking slowly but purposefully toward her favorite roses, exactly as Leo had promised she would. I could see Carmen teaching basic math to a group of younger women who had recently arrived at the center. "And what about your lives outside of here? Your careers, your personal plans?" "Our careers are here now," Leo said. "I've been studying geriatric physical therapy at night. I want to be officially certified to better help the residents. I enrolled in courses on the psychology of aging," Penelope added. "I want to better understand how to help the women who arrive here depressed and scared." "And I," Charles said, "have been working with Mr. Cromwell is to learn about nonprofit management. I want to make sure this place runs perfectly for decades to come." I had raised businessmen, and they had finally become social entrepreneurs. "There's something else," Charles continued. "We've been talking among ourselves, and we want to make a formal proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "We want to officially renounce any inheritance," Penelope said. "We want all of your money to stay here at the Hope Center forever." I turned to them, genuinely surprised for the first time in years. "Are you sure about what you're saying?" "Completely sure," Leo answered. "For 5 years, we've seen what well-used money can accomplish. We've seen how this place changes lives, how it gives dignity to women who have lost all hope. We don't want to be heirs to your fortune. We want to be guardians of your legacy." The tears I had been holding back for 5 years finally broke free. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a pride so deep it ached in my chest. "Do you know what this means?" I asked. "It means we'll work here for the rest of our lives for modest salaries," Charles said. "It means we'll never be rich, but we'll be part of something more important than money. It means," Penelope added, "that we will finally be worthy of being called your children." I walked to my desk and picked up the envelope containing the modified will. With deliberate movements, I tore it into pieces in front of them. "What are you doing?" Leo asked, confused. "That will give you 500 hotherd, zirad each if you complete the 5 years. But you have just proven that you no longer need my money to be the people I always hoped you would be." I took another document from my drawer, the will I had drafted the week before, after months of observing their genuine transformation. "This is my real will," I announced. In it, Charles is named executive director of the Hope Center with a respectable, but not extravagant salary. Leo is named director of rehabilitation programs. Penelope is named director of emotional wellness and creative programs. Their eyes widened in surprise. "The rest of my estate," I continued, "the $4.8 million is designated to create a network of similar centers across the country. The 3 of you will lead that expansion, ensuring that no older woman in this country has to suffer what I was about to suffer." "A network," Charles whispered. 10 centers in the next 15 years, each one run by people who understand that caring for our elders isn't charity, it's justice." The 3 of them stood up at the same time and hugged me with an intensity I hadn't felt since they were children. But it was different now. Now it was the embrace of adults who had earned the right to love and be loved. Why? Penelope asked through her tears. After everything we did to you, why are you giving us this opportunity? Because you are no longer the people who betrayed me, I answered simply. You are the people I always believed you could become. You just needed time to find yourselves. That afternoon, we held a meeting with all the Sense residents to announce the changes. The conference room was filled with curious and excited women, many of whom had developed genuine relationships with my children over the years. I have the honor of announcing, I said from the impromptu podium, that the Hope Center will not only continue to operate indefinitely, but will expand to help thousands more women. The applause was deafening, and I have the even greater honor of announcing that my children, Charles, Leo, and Penelope, have chosen to dedicate their lives to this mission. Mercedes stood up slowly, leaning on her cane. Mrs. Whitlock, may I say something? Of course, Mercedes, your children came here as a punishment, but they are leaving as a blessing. They cared for us when we were sick. They comforted us when we were sad. They celebrated with us when we were happy. I don't know what kind of mother one has to be to raise children who can change so much, but you are an example to us all. That night, I had dinner with my children and Eliza in the communal dining room. It was the first time in 5 years that we were together as a real family. Not as supervisor and employees, not as victim and perpetrators, but as people who loved and respected each other. What are you going to do now? Eliza asked. Now, Charles answered. We're going to change the way this country treats its senior citizens. We're going to make sure, Leo added, that no woman has to choose between dignity and security in her old age. And we're going to prove, Penelope concluded, that a family can be rebuilt on a foundation of respect instead of convenience. After dinner, I went out to the main garden alone. It was my nightly ritual to walk among the flowers we had planted and reflect on the day. But tonight was different. Tonight I could finally rest. At 76, I had achieved something few mothers ever do. Not just raising successful children, but transforming lost children into extraordinary human beings. The legacy I would leave would not be measured in dollars or properties. It would be measured and changed lives, in restored dignity, in love that had been turned into action. I looked up at the stars.